Hello and welcome to Question Time. I'm Benga Ashiru. In 2016, world leaders rose to ratify the climate change deal in Paris. Nigeria, being a signatory to this agreement, promised the world to reduce carbon emission by 20% unconditionally as a national determined contribution. In fulfilling our part of this determined contribution, the federal government has gone to the capital markets to raise a green bond of 10.6 billion naira. Out of this fund, 8.6 billion naira is earmarked for renewable energy. Today, with water level rising, resulting in heavy floods, causing several death toll and thousands displaced, what happens to the deafening alarm bells of climate change? And what also happens to the money from the Federal Ecological Fund? Could this tragic upsurge of Mother Nature be another prize of a big gamble taken too far? You can send us your comments on our social media platforms showing right on your screen. Today, 12 states in Nigeria have been issued flood alerts. What's the rescue strategy from this looming disaster? We had a close-up with Nigeria's Environment Minister, Ibrahim Jibrin, as he explains on this and more issues on the program. Join us in this interview. Honorable Minister of Environment, Alhaji Ibrahim Jibrin, thank you for joining us on this episode of Question Time.
Thank you, Benga.
Now, we need to face the heart of the story headlong. Flooding everywhere. We've had death tolls, we've had people displaced. What's the federal government doing to tackle this issue of flooding?
Well, the issue of flooding is not a one-man affair. It is multi-sectoral. It cuts across different organizations. In the first place, at the beginning of every year, the Nigerian Meteorological Service, under the Ministry of Transportation Aviation Division, is responsible for reeling out figures of the flood forecast, weather forecast for the year, and once that early warning is given at the beginning of the year, probably around January, February, what we do at the Federal Ministry of Environment is to link up with the state ministries of environment to make them understand that the weather forecast for the year is out and that they should take it very seriously. At the Ministry of Environment, we have a station under the Department of Erosion Control and Coastal Zone Management. This came about as a result of the 2012 disastrous flooding that took this country by storm, and many people lost their lives and properties. So there was a national workshop on early warnings, and that national workshop recommended the formation of the establishment of flood early warning system.
But it appears the federal government never took to the early warnings.
The federal government is not the one to take the early warning. It is the population, it is the people in the various states that are supposed to heed that warning. Once we issue the flood warning, it is the responsibility of the state government to take over, disseminate this information to the local government level. But unfortunately, most of these warnings are not taken very seriously. So when you see flooding coming...
When you say the public did not heed to the early warning sign, doesn't the federal government have a responsibility to play to ensure that the public comply with this early warning sign? That brings to question the question of enabling laws and regulations.
The state governments are fully responsible for urban planning and development within their states. It is mostly the State Urban Development Board. Some of them have Capital Development Board, some have generally the entire state's Urban Development Board. It is the responsibility of the planners in these states to map out areas that are liable to flooding. It is the responsibility of the planners to refuse building permits for buildings that may likely be on flood channels, on water channels, on drainages. And then secondly, waste management, particularly solid waste management, is another issue. It is within the purview of states, and they are to take responsibility of managing waste. A lot of areas where flooding occurs, you realize that garbage are dumped into the drainage channels, and they block the channels, and when the waters come, they come in torrents, and there is no way you can stop flooding water. Water will always find its own level. It's a powerful tool and can move anything.
Environmental experts believe that the deafening alarm bells and not heeding to these deafening alarm bells is the price of a big gamble, because people believe that once the effect of not heeding to this warning comes, it could even consume a whole nation. The sad reminder of the Fukushima experience is still there, and so many other flooding, even earthquakes experience. So now, isn't this too sensitive a matter for the federal government to leave in the hands of the state governments and also the public?
In a constitutional democracy like ours, the constitution is there. There are issues that are in the concurrent list. If you talk of defense, you talk of foreign affairs, it's on the exclusive list. Environment is in the concurrent list, meaning
but that doesn't exclude the federal government.
Yes, but
then it's both the federal and the state level.
Don't forget that there is an ecological fund, and every state is given its share of the ecological fund. What is meant in the ecological fund is to be used to address ecological issues.
Even at that, some state governments still complain of difficulty in accessing this ecological funds.
Every month these funds are disbursed. There is no way a state government will complain about the ecological fund because it is shared according to the way the Constitution spells it out. Would
it be right to say gatekeepers of Nigeria's environmental policy are not up and doing, have gone to sleep regarding the responsibility saddled on their shoulders?
I won't accept that proposition. It's not proper, it's not true to a large extent, because, like I said, this is an issue that is multifaceted. We're talking about environment, but there is no way you can talk about environment without proper planning of the cities and townships. If the plans are done and they are observed in the breach, there will be consequences. So when you make provisions, for instance, let me give you an example. If you have a street, look at this, the frontage of our office. It is a local street. It is meant to just convey traffic. If you turn a residential area into a commercial area without recourse to changing the size of the road that will carry the traffic, you are going to end up with a street that has no parking space, and therefore you are going to have on-street parking, and consequently there will be traffic jam. This is because you've not adhered to the development control guideline. In the same vein, when environmental issues are not taken into full consideration, when they are taken lightly, when they are not taken very seriously, you will end up with issues that will turn into health hazard, and it become more costly at that time to contain it. So my position here is that all state government should put their hands together, involve even the 774 local government that we have in this country to take environmental issues very seriously. It is not a one-man show, it is multifaceted, and it has to be seen as such. When flooding is coming, you can hardly stop it. So you have to address it by giving the early warning, evacuate as quickly as possible. People.
When you talk of evacuation now, sometimes it raises the question of how sensitive the government is to people who have to bear the brunt of evacuation. Is there a resettlement plan coming from the federal government? Is there any kind of support for these displaced people?
It is the responsibility of every government all over the world to take care of these people, their lives and property, their means of livelihood. It is a full responsibility. But in a situation where there are powers vested in the federal government and powers in the state government as well as local government, we cannot ignore those powers.
If we are to look at the Ecological Fund, I understand that the Ecological Fund used to be about 3.3% of the entire national budget. Yeah, and so when you look at the sharing formula, each of the states is expected to access how much of the Ecological Fund?
Well, I don't know exactly how much the states are accessing, because the Ecological Fund, remember, is in the office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, and there is a complete outfit there with a permanent secretary handling that issue. So I don't have the figures on my head, but I know percentages go to state, and the remaining 1%, I think, is with the federal government, and that's what the federal government uses in intervention when there is emergency problem like NEMA access that, from that fund, and many other outfits that uses that fund.